Her art was her soul, but a ruthless gallery owner stripped her of credit and drowned her in debt. Publicly shamed and utterly broken, Alara didn't know the dark-eyed stranger watching her collapse was the city's most dangerous mafia boss. He secretly paid her debts, gave her a lavish studio, then obliterated her tormentor with terrifying precision. Now she's safe and adored, but this powerful man didn't just claim her talent, he claimed her. Is she a muse, or forever trapped in his golden cage? The scent of turpentine and aged canvas was a familiar comfort, a deceptive balm against the perpetual ache in Alara Vance's chest. It clung to her clothes, her hair, even permeated the worn fabric of her small, cramped apartment, mingling with the fainter, sadder notes of stale coffee and unfulfilled dreams. Dust motes danced in the anemic afternoon light filtering through the single grimy window, each speck a tiny, glittering reminder of the slow, inevitable decay that seemed to mirror her own existence. Alara traced a delicate crack on the surface of an ancient landscape painting. Her breath held. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled almost imperceptibly. Not from exhaustion, though she was perpetually weary, but from the raw, simmering injustice that gnawed at her. This particular piece, a minor but exquisite 17th-century Dutch work, will be unveiled at Arthur Sterling's latest private auction next week. Sterling, the serpentine owner of the city's most exclusive and ethically dubious art gallery, would bask in its renewed glory, claiming all credit for its meticulous restoration. Alara knew his smug, possessive smile intimately. She'd seen it countless times, each instance twisting a fresh knife in her gut. Another masterpiece, Alara, Sterling had purred just yesterday, his voice slick as oil paint, as he'd surveyed her painstaking work. He hadn't even looked at her. My clients expect nothing less than perfection. And my team consistently delivers. The emphasis on my had been a subtle, yet devastating jab, designed to remind her of her place. A ghost in her own artistry. She set her brush down, the soft bristles whispering against the worn wood of her workbench. Her fingers, stained with pigment, flexed. They were capable hands that could coax life back into faded colors, smooth over centuries of damage, and meticulously reconstruct fragmented narratives. Yet, these same hands felt utterly powerless in the face of her own life. The crushing weight of her parents' debts was a suffocating shroud she wore every day. A relentless, invisible chain binding her to Sterling, who had, with a show of magnanimity, acquired those debts years ago after her parents' tragic accident. He'd offered her a lifeline then, a chance to continue her passion for restoration, but it had come at a price far greater than she could have imagined. Her freedom. Her identity. She moved from the workbench to a small, rickety bookshelf overflowing with art history texts and dog-eared sketch pads. One pad, tucked away at the bottom, held a blueprint of her deepest, most cherished fantasy, Vance Restorations, a quaint, light-filled studio of her own. She imagined the smell of fresh linen canvas, the gentle hum of quiet conversations with fellow artists, the pride of seeing her name on a modest brass plaque. It was a stark, agonizing contrast to her current reality. A reality defined by endless hours in a cramped, poorly lit corner of Sterling's workshop, surrounded by the ghosts of other artists' forgotten masterpieces. If only, she whispered, the words catching in her throat, a fragile prayer lost in the stale air. If only I could just. But the thought dissolved, swallowed by the enormity of her situation. Sterling held all the cards. Her contract, a chilling document with clauses so predatory they bordered on indentured servitude, ensured she couldn't work for anyone else, couldn't claim ownership of any restoration done under his patronage. And if she ever dared to break it, the full weight of the acquired debts would fall upon her, crushing her beneath interest rates that climbed like ivy on a forgotten ruin. Her gaze drifted to a small, chipped porcelain figurine nestled among her meager belongings. A ballerina eternally poised, a delicate crack running down her slender neck. It had belonged to her mother, a dancer with a fragile grace. Beside it lay a tarnished silver locket, engraved with her father's initials. These were her last anchors to a past that felt increasingly distant, increasingly dreamlike. Her last family heirlooms. Sterling knew about them. He made a point of mentioning them once, his eyes glittering with a predatory amusement, a subtle warning that even these treasured fragments could be stripped away if she stepped out of line. The thought sent a fresh wave of chilling fear through her. Alara ran a hand through her dust-laden hair, the strands catching the fading light. She was 28, yet felt decades older, carrying the burden of an ancestral ledger filled with red ink and the unspoken expectations of parents she'd lost too soon. They had believed in her talent, sacrificed so much for her education. To squander it, to simply exist as Sterling's shadow, felt like the ultimate betrayal. But what choice did she have? The walls of her life seemed to be closing in, suffocating her with each passing day. A sudden, sharp pain flared in her shoulder. She'd been hunching over the easel for hours, lost in the intricate dance of brush and pigment, trying to forget, even for a moment, the bleak truth of her circumstances. She straightened, stretching her tired muscles, hearing the satisfying pop of her spine. It was a fleeting moment of physical relief, quickly replaced by the gnawing anxiety that was her constant companion. Tomorrow would bring another long day, another uncredited masterpiece, another step deeper into the abyss Sterling had carved for her. The silence of the apartment pressed in, heavy and oppressive. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a sanctuary, but the deafening hush of solitude, a stark reminder of her isolation. She longed for a confidant, a friend, anyone to share the overwhelming burden. But her life for the past few years had been a solitary pursuit, driven by desperation and the relentless demands of Sterling. Relationships were a luxury she couldn't afford, an unnecessary complication in a life already too fragile. As the last sliver of natural light receded, casting long, ominous shadows across her small space, Alara picked up her sketchpad again. Her fingers idly traced the outline of a graceful archway, the entrance to her dream studio. It was a futile gesture, she knew, a childish fantasy. Yet a tiny, stubborn ember of hope flickered within her, a quiet refusal to let the darkness consume her entirely. She refused to be a fading masterpiece, lost and uncredited. But how to escape this suffocating canvas Sterling had painted for her? The answer remained as elusive as a phantom brushstroke. Her future, a blurred and uncertain landscape, stretched before her, holding only the promise of more struggle, more anonymity, unless something drastic, something impossible intervened. And the likelihood of that felt as remote as the stars hidden behind the city's perpetual haze. There, in Sterling's private gallery, nestled discreetly behind an unassuming facade in the city's oldest financial district, hummed with a thick, almost palpable tension. It was a tension woven from old money, new ambition, and the faint, illicit scent of secrets. Crystal chandeliers, heavy as frozen tears, cast a shimmering, deceptive light over a carefully curated collection of faces, collectors with predatory eyes, dealers with too smooth smiles, and a smattering of socialites whose diamonds glittered with more life than their conversation. Alara stood near the back, a ghost among the glamorous, her simple dark dress a stark contrast to the silks and velvets that swished around her. The clinking of champagne glasses sounded like a distant, mocking chime. Her palms were slick, not from the stifling heat of the crowded room, but from a growing knot of indignation that tightened in her gut. She'd spent 3 agonizing months on the piece about to be unveiled, a lost portrait by a minor symbolist painter, a woman whose ethereal vision Alara understood intrinsically. She'd resurrected Hugh's long-thought dead, painstakingly rebuilt cracked impasto, and breathed life back into the subject's haunting, melancholic eyes. It was arguably her finest work to date, a piece that whispered of her soul. Yet it was Sterling's name that would be lauded, Sterling's prestige that would inflate. A hush fell over the room as Arthur Sterling, resplendent in a custom-tailored suit that seemed stitched from shadows, strode to the velvet-draped dais. He radiated an oily confidence, his smile a practiced, predatory slash. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice, amplified by hidden speakers, resonated with sickening polish. Tonight, we have the distinct honor of presenting a truly remarkable rediscovery. A masterpiece brought back from the brink of oblivion by the unparalleled skill of my dedicated team. Alara's breath hitched. My team. The words felt like sandpaper scraping against raw nerves. Her fingers clenched, nails digging into her palms. She scanned the opulent room, her eyes darting across the complacent faces, the blasé nods. Did no one question? Did no one care that a lie was being spun so brazenly? The portrait, now bathed in a soft, dramatic spotlight, seemed to gaze back at her, its restored eyes holding a silent plea for recognition. Just as Sterling launched into an elaborate, self-congratulatory narrative about the technical challenges and artistic triumphs, a subtle shift occurred at the main entrance. A ripple almost imperceptible to the casual observer passed through the periphery of the room. Alara, hyper-aware in her heightened state, felt it. A man entered, and the air around him seemed to thicken, to darken. Dante Volkov, the serpent. She'd only heard whispers of him, fragments of reputation both fearsome and alluring. He moved with the predatory grace of a big cat, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, his presence an almost physical force that hushed nearby conversations without a word. His suit, impossibly dark and impeccably tailored, seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. His face was a study in sharp angles and honed indifference, framed by dark hair that fell just so. His eyes, when they swept over the room, were chips of obsidian, cold and utterly devoid of warmth. They seemed to possess a knowledge of everything and everyone, a silent, dangerous assessment. He stood for a moment, observing the scene, his gaze lingering on the newly unveiled portrait. Then his eyes moved, slowly, deliberately, over the hushed crowd, finally settling on Alara. For a fleeting instant, she felt exposed, as if his gaze had stripped away her meager defenses, peeling back layers of exhaustion and pretense to see the raw, simmering indignation beneath. A tiny, involuntary shiver traced its way down her spine. There was no warmth, no flirtation in his look, just an intense, almost clinical scrutiny that nevertheless made her skin prickle. Sterling, oblivious to the shift in the room's subtle power dynamics, continued his spiel, his voice now a grating drone in Alara's ears. She stared at the portrait, at the delicate brushstroke she lovingly coaxed back to life, at the signature hidden within a shadow, a signature only she knew existed because she had revealed it. The injustice was a physical ache, a searing burn behind her eyes. That credit belongs to me. The words were out before she could stop them, a raw, desperate whisper that cut through the polite murmurs near her. It wasn't loud enough to reach Sterling, but was loud enough for those around her, for Dante Volkov. A few heads turned, curious and vaguely annoyed. Sterling paused, his eyes sharp and venomous, found her in the crowd. His polished smile didn't falter, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. "Ah, Alara," he purred, his voice dripping with condescension. Ever the passionate artist, so eager to claim a piece of the spotlight, even when it's undeserved. A ripple of tittering laughter spread through the crowd. Alara felt a blush creep up her neck, her cheeks burning with shame. But with all due respect, Mr. Sterling, Alara pushed forward slightly, her voice gaining a desperate, shaky resolve. I spent months on that piece. The technique, the pigments, the discovery of the underlying signature. It was all my work. Sterling's eyes narrowed, his public charm evaporating. Your work, Miss Vance, is merely a byproduct of my generosity. Did I not settle your family's rather considerable debts? Did I not give you a place, however humble, in my establishment? You are bound by contract, a contract which clearly states all work performed under my patronage is my property, my credit. Or have you forgotten the terms of our arrangement? His voice dropped, becoming a low, menacing hiss audible only to those closest. Defy me, Alara, and I will not only ensure you never touch a brush in this city again, but I will also ensure every single dirty secret of your impoverished past, every desperate plea, is laid bare for all to see. Your reputation, your fragile little dream, will be utterly annihilated. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. His words were daggers, each one hitting its mark with sickening precision. The cold dread that had been a dull throb intensified, spreading through her veins like ice. She was trapped, helpless, exposed. Her eyes, wide and trembling, flickered towards Dante Volkov, a desperate, unbidden plea in their depths. Dante hadn't moved. His posture remained statuesque, his expression unreadable. But as Alara met his gaze, she saw it, a subtle, almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes, a momentary hardening that belied his outward calm. Then, with a fractional tilt of his head, he gave a silent, almost imperceptible signal. One of his men, a hulking shadow who had materialized silently behind Sterling, placed a hand, firm and unyielding, on Sterling's arm. Sterling, mid-scathing remark, faltered. His eyes widened, a flicker of genuine fear replacing his smug cruelty as he recognized the man's silent authority. Without a word, the bodyguard subtly but firmly steered Sterling away from the dais, towards a discreet exit. The gallery owner, for all his bluster, was a coward at heart. He went, albeit with a face contorted in frustrated fury, like a snake being dragged from its prey. The sudden, unexplained departure of Sterling left a bewildered silence in its wake. The crowd murmured, confused, but no one dared question the silent, powerful force that had orchestrated it. Dante Volkov began to move, his steps deliberate, unhurried, cutting through the stunned silence like a dark current. He bypassed the socialites and the collectors, his path unwavering, drawing him directly to Alara. She stood frozen, a deer caught in the headlights, her heart hammering against her ribs with a frantic, terrifying rhythm. He stopped inches from her, his presence utterly overwhelming, a wall of controlled power and expensive cologne. The scent was clean, masculine, a stark contrast to Sterling's cloying musk. He looked down at her, his obsidian eyes holding hers in a gaze that was both invasive and oddly captivating. The humiliation still burned, the fear still gnawed, but now, mixed with it, was a dangerous surge of curiosity. Your art, it has a price, Dante Volkov finally said, his voice a low, gravelly timbre that resonated deep within her, sending another shiver through her body. It wasn't a question of money. It was a statement, a declaration. What is yours? The question hung in the air, a silent challenge, a veiled promise. It was loaded with far more than just financial implications. It implied possession, ownership, a claim that was both alarming and, to a woman utterly at her wit's end, held a flicker of something dangerously akin to hope. A hope as sharp and potentially devastating as a broken piece of glass, but a hope nonetheless. Alara swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. She had no answer. Not yet. But in his eyes, she saw a reflection of a world she knew nothing about, a world where the rules were different, where her misery might just be an opening. And the thought, as terrifying as it was, held a strange, undeniable allure. The reverberations of Sterling's public humiliation still echoed in Alara's mind, a searing brand on her pride. But the true fallout hit her barely an hour after the auction dispersed. A harsh, insistent knocking rattled her apartment door. Her heart leaped into her throat, a frantic bird trapped in her ribs. She peered through the peephole, her breath catching. Two men, built like brick walls, stood impassively on her landing. They weren't Sterling's usual gallery attendants. These were different. Their suits, though expensive, conveyed a silent, menacing authority, not artistic pretension. She opened the door a crack, her hand trembling. "Can I help you?" Alara Vance, one of them asked, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. He held up a thick, official-looking envelope. Legal notice. Breach of contract. Immediate repayment of outstanding debts. His gaze swept past her, lingering on the meager contents of her small living room. And per Clause 7b, all tools, materials, and items acquired under the patronage of Mr. Arthur Sterling are hereby reclaimed as collateral. Alara's vision blurred. What? You can. We can. The other man interjected, his voice just as devoid of emotion. He pushed the door open wider, forcing Alara to stumble back. The cold, sterile smell of official paper mixed with her subtle, unsettling scent of expensive leather and something sharp, almost metallic. We advise you not to resist, Miss Vance. It will only complicate matters. She stood frozen, paralyzed by a mixture of shock and utter terror, as they systematically moved through her apartment. They weren't violent, not overtly. Their actions were chillingly efficient. Her worn wooden toolbox, filled with brushes she'd cherished since art school, palette knives, custom-made solvents, everything was swept into a large canvas bag. The worst came when the second man, with a disturbing lack of gentleness, reached for her small, chipped porcelain ballerina figurine and then the tarnished silver locket. No, Alara cried, finally finding her voice, a strangled sound of protest. She lunged forward, but the first man blocked her with an arm as solid as oak. Please, those are family heirlooms. They have nothing to do with Sterling. The contract is comprehensive, Miss Vance, the first man said, his eyes devoid of sympathy. All personal property is subject to confiscation in case of breach. Perhaps you should have read the fine print more carefully. Her mother's figurine clattered into a box, followed by her father's locket. The sound was like a hammer blow to her soul. She watched, helpless, as they vanished from sight, leaving gaping, empty spaces on her shelf. The apartment suddenly felt hollowed out, stripped not just of her possessions, but her last vestiges of connection to a life before Sterling. When they left, the silence that descended was heavy, suffocating. The cold spot where her heirlooms had been seemed to burn with an unbearable ache. For the next 2 days, Alara walked in a daze, a desperate, frantic energy driving her. She visited every small law firm she could find, her voice hoarse from repeating her story. Each time, she was met with the same polite, yet firm refusal. Against Arthur Sterling? I'm afraid that's not a battle we can win, Miss Vance. His legal team is formidable. There seems to be a conflict of interest. One lawyer, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes, leaned forward conspiratorially. His reach is extensive, dear. You'd be hard-pressed to find anyone willing to go against him in this city. He has friends. The implied warning was clear. Sterling wasn't just a gallery owner. He was a force untouchable. Each rejection felt like another stone added to the suffocating weight on her chest. She was truly alone. The realization settled deep within her, cold and absolute. Then, a flicker of something new, something utterly unexpected, pierced the gloom. A crisp, official-looking envelope slid under her door. Not a threat this time, but a notification. Her overdue electricity bill, the one she'd been dreading, had been paid in full. The next day, the same for her water bill. The flickering lights in her apartment, a constant reminder of her precarious existence, suddenly shone steadily. Alara stared at the notices, a knot of suspicion tightening in her stomach. Who? And why? She had no family, no friends with that kind of discreet generosity. The only person who had witnessed her public despair, the only one with the resources and implied power to make such silent moves, was Dante Volkov, the serpent. Her mind reeled. Was this a kindness? Or was it a claim? A way of asserting his presence, his watchful eye, without ever having to speak? The thought sent a peculiar mix of gratitude and unease through her veins. It was terrifying to be seen so completely, but also, disturbingly, a little comforting. A few days later, a heavy, nondescript package arrived via courier. The deliverer man, a stern-faced individual, handed it to her without a word, vanished before she could even formulate a question. Inside, nestled in folds of dark, plush velvet, were her art tools. All of them. Her worn brushes, her favorite palette knives, even the tiny specialized tools for delicate detail work. But there was more. Interspersed with her old familiar pieces were several new ones, exquisitely crafted, gleaming with unused promise. A new set of sable brushes, finer than anything she'd ever owned. A heavy silver palette knife, perfectly balanced. They were tools of a quality she could only dream of. Her fingers trembled as she touched them, a wave of defiant joy washing over her. She'd mourned these tools, mourned the part of herself they represented. Now they were back, enhanced, an undeniable message. Beneath them lay a small, elegantly embossed card. The paper was thick, luxurious, faintly scented with something subtle yet undeniably masculine. On it, in a precise, almost calligraphic script, were 3 words: "A craftsman needs her instruments." Alara sank onto her worn sofa, clutching the card, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The message was clear, chillingly so. Dante knew. He knew everything Sterling had taken, everything she valued, and he had effortlessly reclaimed it. It wasn't an act of charity. It was an act of calculated power. He had chosen to intervene, to provide, to subtly control. She was no longer just a struggling artist. She was an asset, a possession. The gold of the new brushes, the gleam of the silver knife, felt heavier than their actual weight. She was being offered a golden cage, a life free from Sterling's oppression, but under the watchful, obsessive eye of someone far more powerful, far more dangerous. The image of Dante's dark, unwavering gaze at the auction flashed in her mind. His question, "What is yours?" Her own independence, a fragile thing she clung to even in her despair, felt like it was slipping away. She closed her eyes, weighing the terrifying cost. A life of fear, constant struggle, and eventual ruin under Sterling, or a life of security, artistic freedom, but with a silent, invisible chain binding her to Dante Volkov. A puppet, perhaps, but a puppet with the finest strings, dancing on a stage bathed in light, safe from the shadows that had threatened to consume her. As she reopened her eyes, they landed on the empty space where her mother's figurine once stood. It was a searing reminder of what she had lost, and what she still had left to lose. She was out of options. Utterly, irrevocably out of options. The golden cage, terrifying as it might be, was the only escape from the rotting trap Sterling had set, and a part of her, a deep, primal part, felt a dangerous, alluring pull towards the protection, however possessive, that Dante Volkov offered. She knew with chilling certainty that her life was about to change irrevocably, and that Dante Volkov, the serpent, had just laid his claim. And she, in her utter despair, was powerless to refuse. The address on the embossed card was discreet, tucked away on a quiet street far removed from Sterling's ostentatious gallery. Alara clutched the heavy card in her trembling hand, her heart thrumming with a bizarre mix of apprehension and a nascent, dangerous hope. When she found the building, it was an unassuming brownstone, its large, arched windows hinting at the commercial space within. There was no grand signage, no gilded letters, just a polished brass plaque with a single, elegant V etched into it. Vance. The thought sent a jolt through her. The key Dante had sent, sleek and heavy, slid smoothly into the lock. A soft click, and the door swung inward. Alara stepped across the threshold, her old worn shoes squeaking faintly on the gleaming polished concrete floor, and stopped dead. This was not merely a studio. This was a sanctuary. Light pure and unblemished, streamed in through vast, north-facing windows, illuminating a space that felt impossibly large after the suffocating confines of her old apartment and Sterling's cramped workshop. The air, cool and fresh, smelled faintly of new wood and possibility, a stark contrast to the stale, chemical tang she was accustomed to. High ceilings soared above, lending an almost cathedral-like reverence to the space. Pristine white walls stretched, waiting to be adorned with colors and creativity. There were ergonomic workbenches, state-of-the-art lighting systems, a small, elegantly appointed office tucked in a corner, and even a compact, modern kitchenette. Every detail spoke of meticulous planning, of an unspoken understanding of an artist's needs, and perhaps more unsettlingly, of limitless resources. Her own meager belongings, the few boxes she still possessed, were already there, neatly stacked against one wall. And on a central workbench, bathed in the perfect, diffused light, lay her precious tools, perfectly organized, nestled amongst the new, gleaming ones Dante had provided. The silver palette knife glinted, a silent promise. Alara walked slowly, her footsteps echoing in the pristine silence, her fingers trailing along the smooth, cool surfaces of the new equipment. This wasn't just an upgrade. It was an entirely new world. A world undeniably gifted by Dante Volkov. A gilded cage, but one crafted with such exquisite consideration, it was almost impossible to resent. Almost. The first few days in Vance restorations, as the subtle V now seemed to imply, were a blur of exhilaration and unease. The sheer luxury of space, the abundance of light, the effortless functionality of her new tools, allowed her to work with a focus she hadn't experienced in years. She threw herself into a new project, a complex historical landscape that demanded every ounce of her skill, losing herself in the intricate dance of pigment and canvas. Yet, even in her absorption, a part of her remained acutely aware. She was being watched. There were no visible cameras, no obvious guards, but the feeling was omnipresent. A subtle hum of unseen surveillance, a prickle in the back of her neck that suggested unseen eyes. She'd occasionally glance up from her easel, half expecting to see Dante himself, a silent sentinel in a doorway. He rarely appeared during her working hours, but the studio always felt subtly adjusted each morning. A new art book on a shelf, a fresh pot of a rare herbal tea waiting in the kitchenette, a faint, lingering scent of expensive cologne that told her he had been there in the quiet hours of the night. It was unnerving, yet undeniably comforting. He was present without being intrusive, protective without being overtly restrictive. A silent, powerful force shaping her new reality. One afternoon, a sharp rap on the outer door startled her. She opened it to find a deliverer man, not the stoic, silent type, but a young, nervous man balancing a large, steaming container. "Delivery for Ms. Vance," he stammered, avoiding her eyes. "From Mr. Volkov." Inside the container was a perfectly portioned gourmet meal, pan-seared scallops with saffron risotto, a crisp green salad, and a tiny, decadent chocolate tort. It was far beyond anything she would have ever made for herself, a stark contrast to her usual, hastily prepared sandwich. Alara stared at the food, a complex mix of emotions swirling within her. "Tell Mr. Volkov, thank you," she said, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. It was another layer of the golden cage, another demonstration of his pervasive control, his obsessive attention to her well-being. She ate it, slowly savoring each bite, even as a tiny voice in her head screamed about her lost independence. The food was undeniably delicious, a brief, indulgent escape from her anxieties. Then Dante started appearing. His visits were always unexpected, always preceded by that subtle shift in the air, a drop in temperature, a tightening of the atmosphere. He would simply be there, leaning against the doorframe, his dark suit a stark silhouette against the bright studio light. He rarely spoke, his obsidian eyes sweeping over her work, then lingering on her face, his expression unreadable. Alara found herself holding her breath each time, her brush pausing mid-stroke. His presence was commanding, a silent assertion of ownership that both intimidated and strangely thrilled her. She'd watch him surreptitiously at first, then with growing fascination. His movements were fluid, precise. There was a dangerous grace about him, even when he was doing nothing but standing still. One day, she saw him interact with a subordinate. A man in a dark suit, his face pale and deferential, approached Dante with a tablet. Their conversation was a low murmur, but Alara caught fragments. Words like shipment, territory, complications. Dante's voice was a barely audible rumble, yet the subordinate visibly flinched with each word, nodding frantically, his fear palpable. When Dante finished, the man practically scurried away, leaving Dante alone in the doorway, his face a mask of cold, unyielding power. Then his gaze shifted to Alara, and something in his eyes softened, infinitesimally, a subtle thawing that sent a curious warmth through her. It was a stark, breathtaking contrast to the ruthlessness she just witnessed. He was a monster, yes, but a monster who looked at her differently. "The light here is good," he stated, his voice low, a rare verbal offering. Alara swallowed. "It's perfect, Mr. Volkov. Thank you." He simply nodded, his eyes back on her canvas. The composition more vibrant than before. More free. His observation struck her. He wasn't just observing her, he was seeing her work, truly seeing it, and recognizing the change in her. "The space helps," she admitted, her voice a little shaky. "And the tools." A faint, almost imperceptible curve touched his lips. It wasn't a smile, not really, but a fleeting softening that revealed just how rarely he allowed such an expression. "A talent like yours shouldn't be stifled. Or obscured." The implication was clear. Sterling had done both. He was undoing it. The conversations remained short, often punctuated by long, charged silences. But through these brief exchanges, Alara began to piece together fragments of the man behind the fearsome reputation. He was fiercely intelligent, his observations about art surprisingly astute. He seemed to possess an encyclopedic knowledge of not just the market, but the historical context and even the technical aspects of restoration. This wasn't just a man of brute force. He was a man of cultured, dangerous intellect. One evening, as dusk painted the studio in hues of lavender and gray, Alara was meticulously cleaning her brushes. Dante had been present for an hour, silently observing. The quiet between them had become less strained, more intimate. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Volkov?" she asked, the words slipping out before she could second-guess herself. Her voice was barely a whisper, a daring challenge against the silence. He turned from the window, his silhouette dark against the city lights beginning to bloom outside. "Doing what, Alara?" His voice was a low rumble, devoid of accusation, laced with a hint of something deeper. All of this, she gestured vaguely around the immaculate studio, to the perfectly organized tools, to the lingering scent of the expensive tea. "The bills, the studio, the protection. You don't owe me anything." He walked closer, his steps soft, deliberate, yet radiating an undeniable power. He stopped just a few feet from her workbench, his shadow falling over her. The air crackled with a palpable tension. "No," he conceded, his voice almost impossibly soft, yet laced with an iron will. "I don't. But I saw something at that auction. A spirit. A fire that Sterling tried to extinguish. And I decided that fire belonged to me. To ignite, not to smother." Alara's breath caught. "Belonged to me." The words were possessive, chillingly so, yet delivered with a conviction that resonated deep within her, igniting a strange, dangerous flutter in her chest. He was not just saving her, he was claiming her. And the terrifying truth was, after months of being invisible, of being used and discarded, the idea of belonging to someone so powerful, so utterly in control, was beginning to feel intoxicating. Her moral compass spun wildly, caught between alarm and an undeniable magnetic pull. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, searching his dark gaze for answers. What did this mean for her? For them. The studio, her art, her very existence now felt inextricably bound to this man, this serpent who offered freedom from one cage only to place her, gently, into another. And the most dangerous part? She was slowly, inevitably, finding herself drawn to the golden bars. A silent, unspoken agreement was forming between them, forged in fear, cemented by his protection, and subtly, dangerously, inflamed by a forbidden spark of desire. His eyes held hers, a silent challenge, a promise of a world she could barely fathom. And in that moment, as the last of the city's natural light faded, Alara knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that she was inextricably bound to Dante Volkov, and her journey into his world had only just begun. What he would ask of her, what she would become, remained an unanswered whisper in the studio's burgeoning silence. The rhythm of her new life in Vance Restorations had begun to settle into a deceptive calm. Alara found solace in the methodical strokes of her brush, the quiet hum of her specialized ventilation system, the way the light fell just so on her current project, a challenging contemporary abstract she'd landed through a discreet contact Dante had provided. The terror of Sterling's threats had receded, replaced by a quiet, burgeoning sense of creative freedom she hadn't dared to dream of. The gilded cage, she mused, felt more like a sanctuary now, its bars almost invisible in the soft, perfect lighting of her studio. Then the first fissure appeared. It began subtly, as most insidious things do. A reputable art blog, usually reserved for scholarly critiques and high-profile exhibitions, published an article that sent a chilling ripple through her newfound piece. The headline, innocent enough, spoke of the resurgence of uncredited restoration practices. But the content, penned by an anonymous industry insider, quickly spiraled into thinly veiled accusations. It questioned the sudden opening of new, independently funded studios, hinting at dubious financial backing and unproven expertise. It spoke of artists abandoning their patrons for greener, albeit murkier, pastures. Alara's hands, which had been deftly mixing a vibrant ultramarine, froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Though her name wasn't explicitly mentioned, the timing, the pointed accusations, the subtle references to specific restoration techniques she employed, it was undeniably about her. And by extension, about Dante. Sterling's poisonous hand. It was a calculated, insidious attack designed to erode the very foundation of her burgeoning reputation, to cast a shadow of suspicion over every masterpiece she touched. A hot wave of indignation surged through her, quickly followed by a cold plunge of fear. She remembered Sterling's words at the auction. Your reputation, your fragile little dream, will be utterly annihilated. He was making good on his threat. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a digital smear, a modern-day witch hunt designed to ostracize her from the art community, painting her as a compromised artist and, by extension, tainting any work she did for Dante. Her first instinct was to fight back, to write a rebuttal, to expose Sterling for the manipulative predator he was. But the memory of the lawyers, their polite refusals, their veiled warnings about Sterling's friends, quickly snuffed out that defiant spark. She was still powerless. She still lived in the shadow of his old debts, however implicitly paid by Dante. She paced the studio, the polished concrete cool beneath her bare feet, her mind racing. What would Dante do? Would he even care about such a subtle public relations attack? He dealt in shadows and power, not newspaper gossip. Would this damage his own projects, his carefully constructed legitimate fronts? The thought brought a fresh wave of panic. She was, after all, a liability in his world, vulnerable link. Just as her anxiety threatened to overwhelm her, the studio door opened. Donna. He stood there, as always, a dark, imposing silhouette against the outside light. He held a tablet in one hand, his thumb idly scrolling. His face was a mask of unreadable calm, but Alara felt a shiver of primal dread. He knew. Of course he knew. Nothing escaped his notice. You saw the article, she said, her voice tight, barely a whisper. He simply nodded, his eyes, dark as polished obsidian, meeting hers. There was no anger, no accusation, just a profound, unsettling stillness. A pathetic attempt at sabotage. He's trying to ruin me, Alara pleaded, the desperation raw in her tone. To make me an outcast. To make my work for you. Suspect. Dante walked slowly towards her, his steps deliberate, unhurried. The faint scent of his cologne, usually a subtle comfort, now held a sharp, dangerous edge. He stopped in front of her, close enough for her to feel the residual warmth of his presence. He will not succeed. His voice was low, and almost purr, but laced with an unyielding conviction that sent shivers down her spine. I warned you about Sterling, Alara. He is a cockroach. He scuttles in the dark, but he cannot withstand the light. Or a boot. He didn't need to elaborate. Alara understood the veiled threat. But how? How would he silence such a pervasive, insidious attack? The answer came not through violence, but through a chillingly efficient display of his true power, the manipulation of information and finance. Over the next few days, Alara watched, baffled and awed, as Sterling's world began to unravel. The art blog that published the defamatory article mysteriously shut down, its domain vanishing from the internet. Other art publications, previously enthusiastic about Sterling's next auction, abruptly canceled their features. Major collectors who had been loyal to Sterling for decades suddenly withdrew their patronage. His name, once synonymous with exclusivity, became toxic, whispered with a vague sense of unease. She overheard snippets of phone conversations from Dante's office, the low rumble of his voice occasionally punctuated by curt, decisive commands. Words like diversify the portfolio, liquidate assets, redirect investments. It wasn't about physical harm. It was about financial strangulation, a systemic dismantling of Sterling's entire empire. Dante was systematically pulling the strings, orchestrating a devastating cascade of events that was swiftly rendering Sterling a non-entity in the art world. Within a week, Sterling's once thriving gallery stood dark, its windows papered over with for-lease signs. His opulent penthouse apartment, featured prominently in society magazines, was suddenly on the market. The whispers on the street, once a trickle, became a flood. Sterling had overextended, made bad investments, fallen out of favor with powerful patrons. His fall was swift, total, and utterly devastating. And it was all Dante's doing. Alara felt a strange mix of emotions. A profound sense of relief, of course, that the threat was gone. But beneath it, a chilling awe at Dante's reach, his effortless ability to erase a man from existence without a single drop of blood being shed. He didn't fight battles, he simply eliminated the playing field. He hadn't just removed the threat, he had annihilated its source. One evening, Dante entered the studio as Alara was packing up. He observed her in silence for a moment, his gaze intense. Sterling is no longer a concern, he stated, his voice a low, final pronouncement. Alara nodded, her throat tight. Ah, I saw. It was thorough. A faint, almost imperceptible curve touched his lips. It wasn't amusement, but a flicker of grim satisfaction. When a man threatens what is mine, Alara, he ceases to exist in any meaningful capacity. He becomes a ghost. The possessiveness in his words sent a fresh wave of shivers through her. What is mine? That included her. She looked into his dark, unyielding eyes, and for the first time, truly understood the depth of the world she had stepped into. Dante Volkov wasn't just a powerful man. He was a force of nature, a silent predator who moved with absolute, terrifying control. She was safe, truly safe, in a way she had never been before. But that safety came with an invisible tether, binding her ever closer to the serpent. And the true nature of that bond, what would ultimately demand of her, remained a profound, unsettling mystery. The aftermath of Sterling's obliteration had left Alara in a strange, suspended state. The fear, once a constant companion, had dissipated, replaced by a profound, almost dizzying sense of relief. But beneath it, a new and complex emotion bloomed, a chilling awe for Dante Volkov's power, mingled with a dangerous, burgeoning fascination. He had not merely removed a threat, he had demonstrated the chilling efficiency of his world, a world where enemies simply ceased to exist, not with a bang, but with a silent, devastating whimper. The studio, once a place of quiet solitude, now felt infused with his unseen presence, his silent claim. Alara found herself glancing at the door more often, listening for the subtle shift in the air that announced his arrival. His visits became slightly more frequent, his silent observation a less oppressive, more familiar rhythm. He still rarely spoke, but his eyes, those dark pools of obsidian, followed her every move, tracing the lines of her work, the curve of her hand as she mixed paints. It was a gaze that was both invasive and, to her growing discomfort, oddly alluring. One evening, a storm raged outside, lashing rain against the vast studio windows, transforming the city into a blur of weeping lights. Alara had stayed late, immersed in a particularly intricate passage of a new restoration, a delicate floral motif on a damaged porcelain vase. The rhythmic drumming of the rain against the glass was a hypnotic backdrop to the subtle scraping of her tools. She hadn't heard him enter, only felt the familiar shift in the atmosphere, a sudden drop in the ambient temperature that hinted at his silent presence. Dante stood by the far window, his back to her, watching the storm. His dark suit was slightly damp at the shoulders, droplets clinging to the rich fabric. He had removed his jacket, and the sleeves of his expensive white shirt were rolled up to his forearms, revealing strong, corded muscles. Alara paused, her breath catching in her throat. She found herself staring, not at the storm, but at him. The broad expanse of his back, the powerful line of his shoulders. She'd always seen him as an untouchable force, a meticulously tailored enigma. But in that moment, in the dim, storm-lit studio, he seemed almost exposed. He shifted, turning slightly, and the movement caught the light in a way that revealed something she hadn't noticed before. On the inside of his left forearm, just below the elbow, was a scar. It wasn't a neat surgical line, but a jagged, angry track, puckered and faded with age, a brutal testament to a past violence. It stood out starkly against his tanned, unblemished skin, a raw, devastating imperfection on an otherwise perfect facade. Alara gasped, a small, involuntary sound. Dante froze. His head snapped around, his eyes locking onto hers. For a fleeting instant, a raw, almost animalistic flash of something akin to vulnerability, or perhaps warning, crossed his face before he slammed his customary mask back into place. His sleeve immediately began to unroll, a swift, practiced movement designed to hide the telltale mark. I'm sorry," Alara stammered, her cheeks flushing with heat, mortified that she had stared, mortified that she had glimpsed something so deeply personal, so clearly meant to be concealed. The scar spoke of a world far more brutal than even Sterling's machinations, a world of pain and survival. Dante didn't speak immediately. He simply watched her, his gaze intense, assessing. The silence stretched, thick and charged, filled only by the persistent drumming of the rain. Alara felt a prickle of fear, wondering if she had overstepped, crossed an unspoken boundary that would bring his wrath down upon her. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stopped rolling down his sleeve. He held his arm out slightly, allowing the jagged scar to remain visible. It was a silent, almost reluctant invitation, a momentary lowering of the guard. "It's old," he said, his voice a low rumble, devoid of emotion, yet carrying a subtle undertone she couldn't quite decipher. Alara's gaze, drawn by a morbid curiosity, traced the angry line. What happened?" He turned fully to face her, leaning back against the cool glass of the window, his form partially obscured by the stormy light. "A reminder," he said, his eyes now fixed on some distant point beyond the glass, his voice almost introspective. "From a time when the stakes were different. Before the rules were entirely mine to make." He paused, a long, pregnant silence. "This life, Alara, it is not one chosen for comfort or peace." His words, spare and almost cryptic, painted a vivid picture in Alara's mind. She saw him, younger, perhaps, navigating a world of brutal survival, earning that scar, learning the harsh lessons that had forged him into the formidable man he was today. The sheer loneliness of such a path, the constant vigilance, the inability to truly let down his guard, it hit her with a sudden, profound wave of empathy. He was a king, yes, but a king in a kingdom built on shadows and violence, forever isolated by his crown. "I understand," Alara said softly, surprising herself with the sincerity in her voice. She thought of her own burdens, the invisible scars of poverty and artistic anonymity. "My world, it wasn't violent, not like yours, but it was suffocating. Every day, just trying to keep my head above water, to keep my parents' memory alive through my art, even when no one saw it. Always fighting to prove my worth, and always feeling like I was losing." She looked at him then, her eyes, filled with her own unspoken pain, meeting his. "I had dreams, Mr. Volkov, of a studio, of a life where my art truly mattered. But the debt, it was a constant, heavy weight, like a stone tied to my ankle, dragging me down." She gestured vaguely towards her tools, her work. "This place, it's more than I ever imagined. More than I deserved." A flicker, something tender and almost possessive, softened his dark eyes. He pushed away from the window, closing the distance between them. He stopped inches from her, his presence utterly overwhelming. Her breath hitched. The air between them crackled with an unspoken tension, an electric current of shared vulnerability, and a nascent, dangerous desire. His gaze dropped to her hand, still clutching the porcelain vase she was restoring. Slowly, gently, he reached out. His fingers, long and strong, closed around hers, carefully taking the vase. His touch was warm, firm, sending a jolt through her arm. He didn't release her hand immediately. Instead, his thumb brushed lightly over her knuckles, a silent, intimate gesture that spoke volumes. "You deserve this, Alara," he said, his voice a low, rough murmur that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. And more. Your fire, it needed a proper canvas. And a protector. His eyes held hers, deep and fathomless. In their depths, Alara saw not just power, but a glimpse of the fierce, unyielding loyalty that had driven him to dismantle Sterling's empire for her. A loyalty that was terrifying in its intensity, but utterly, breathtakingly seductive. She was no longer just an artist to him. She was something more, something claimed, something fiercely protected. And in that charged silence, amidst the drumming rain and the unspoken confessions, Alara knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that she was irrevocably, dangerously drawn to the man whose scars mirrored the hidden wounds in her own soul. The cage might be gilded, but it was also beginning to feel like home. The last lingering rays of sunset cast a warm, golden glow across the polished concrete floor of Vance Restorations as Alara carefully locked the heavy studio door. The day had been productive, filled with the satisfying scent of linseed oil and the quiet hum of her creativity. She carried a small, leather-bound sketchbook under her arm, filled with preliminary sketches for a daring new public art project, a collaboration she'd been offered through one of Dante's more legitimate contacts. A genuine opportunity, untainted by Sterling's grime or Dante's shadows. For the first time in her life, Alara felt a fragile, exhilarating sense of true autonomy, of building something for herself. The subtle presence of Dante in her life had shifted. His visits remained, but they were laced with an unspoken understanding, a growing intimacy that both thrilled and terrified her. The shared vulnerability of the storm-lashed night, the glimpse of his hidden scar, had irrevocably altered the dynamic. The golden cage, once a symbol of her beautiful imprisonment, now felt more like a fortress, a place where her art and her heart were finally safe. Or so she had allowed herself to believe. The city street outside was bustling, the evening rush hour still thick in the air. The crisp autumn breeze, usually invigorating, now carried a subtle, almost imperceptible chill. Alara pulled her lightweight scarf tighter around her neck, a fleeting sense of unease pricking at the back of her mind. It was nothing concrete, just a shadow flitting across her periphery, a sudden, almost imperceptible dip in the cheerful cacophony of city life. She dismissed it as lingering paranoia, a habit ingrained from years of living on the edge. She headed towards the bus stop, lost in thought, planning the next steps for her project. The world seemed vibrant, full of possibility. The scent of roasting chestnuts from a nearby vendor mingled with exhaust fumes, a familiar, comforting urban symphony. Then a sudden, brutal jerk. A rough hand clamped over her mouth, muffling her startled gasp. Another arm, thick and unyielding, wrapped around her waist, hoisting her off her feet. The smell of something sickly sweet and cloying, chloroform, assaulted her senses, burning in her nostrils, making her head spin. Panic, cold and suffocating, seized her. She thrashed, kicked, desperately trying to scream, but the world tilted, blurring into a kaleidoscope of rapidly fading lights and muffled sounds. The leather-bound sketchbook slipped from her grasp, landing with a soft thud on the pavement, its pages fluttering open, a testament to her hopes, now scattered and vulnerable. Darkness. When consciousness swam back, it was a slow, painful crawl. Her head throbbed, a devastating ache behind her eyes, and her mouth felt dry, metallic. The air was cold, damp, and smelled of dust, decay, and something acrid, vaguely chemical. Her wrists were bound tightly behind her back, the rough rope biting into her skin. Her ankles were also secured, making any movement impossible. Alara forced her eyes open. The scene that greeted her was one of utter despair. She was in what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse or factory. High, grimy windows offered no view of the outside world, only streaks of dim, indifferent light. Bare concrete floors stretched endlessly, marred by stains and debris. The vast, empty space echoed with a chilling silence, broken only by the sporadic drip of water somewhere in the distance. The isolation was absolute, a crushing weight that pressed in on her from all sides. She tried to push herself up, a desperate, futile struggle against her bonds. A groan escaped her lips. The sound seemed swallowed by the cavernous space. Tears, hot and stinging, pricked at her eyes. No, not again. Not here. A harsh, grating laugh echoed from the shadows. Alara's breath hitched. Her blood ran cold. The sound was instantly recognizable, a memory that sent a fresh wave of terror through her. Arthur Sterling stepped into a sliver of weak light, his face contorted into a grotesque parody of a smile. His usual impeccable suits were gone, replaced by worn, slightly stained clothing, and his hair was unkempt, his eyes bloodshot, gleaming with a chilling, deranged triumph. He looked utterly broken, yet terrifyingly reborn through hatred. Well, he sneered, his voice raspy. Look what the cat dragged in. The celebrated artist, Alara Vance. Or should I say, Dante Volkov's little muse. Alara stared at him, her heart hammering. Sterling, you. I thought you were gone. He let out another guttural laugh, a sound devoid of mirth. Gone? Oh, I was. Thanks to your protector, the serpent. He stripped me of everything. My gallery, my name, my reputation. He left me with nothing but the clothes on my back and a burning desire for revenge. His eyes, filled with a crazed malevolence, fixed on hers. But some powerful people don't appreciate Dante's methods. They saw an opportunity. They gave me a second chance. A chance to show the great Volkov what it feels like to lose something precious. Something irreplaceable. He walked closer, his heavy footsteps echoing ominously. Alara flinched, a wave of helplessness washing over her. She was a pawn again, caught in a game far larger and deadlier than she could ever comprehend. Sterling stopped directly in front of her, his foul breath washing over her face. And what could be more precious to the great Dante Volkov than the little lamb he so carefully protected? His art. His eyes gleamed with a cruel satisfaction. He stepped back, gesturing to a corner of the warehouse. Alara's gaze followed, and a fresh wave of horror washed over her, making her stomach churn. There, illuminated by a single harsh bare bulb, stood her masterpiece. The painstakingly restored symbolist portrait, the one that had ignited her defiant outburst at the auction, the one Sterling had claimed as his own. It was propped on a makeshift easel, seemingly unharmed. But beneath it, on the dusty floor, lay a small, rusty axe. You're going to destroy it, Sterling announced, his voice a chilling whisper. You're going to take that axe, and you're going to put it through every single one of your precious brushstrokes. You will obliterate the face, gouge out the eyes, shatter the canvas. You will turn your greatest achievement into a pile of worthless rags, live, for Dante Volkov to witness. Alara's eyes widened, tears streaming down her face. No, I won't do it. You can't make me. The idea of defiling her own work, of destroying a piece of her soul, was a pain far more acute than any physical threat. It was a violation of her very being. Sterling chuckled, a truly monstrous sound. Oh, I think you will. Because if you don't, he pulled out a small old-fashioned camera. I'll send him a different video. A video of me being very persuasive. And trust me, Alara, my methods of persuasion are far less artistic than yours. The choice is simple, your masterpiece or your pretty little face. And perhaps, even more importantly, his reputation. Because if Dante Volkov can't even protect his little artist, what kind of serpent is he? He clicked a button on the camera, and a small red light began to blink. Ready for your close-up, Alara? He purred. He pushed the rusty axe closer to her bound hands. Time to paint your own destruction. Alara stared at the axe, then at the portrait, then at Sterling's manic, expectant face. A desperate, betrayed cry tore through her. This was the ultimate humiliation, the ultimate defilement, not just of her art, but of the safety Dante had promised. He had claimed her, protected her, but now she was a pawn again, forced to commit an act of artistic suicide to satisfy a madman's revenge. Please, she whimpered, her voice raw, but Sterling merely grinned, his finger hovering over the record button. The stark reality of her situation hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was utterly alone, utterly powerless. The choice was no choice at all. Her hands, still trembling from the residual chloroform, reached for the cold, rough handle of the axe, her gaze fixed on the beautiful, haunting eyes of the portrait, now staring back at her with a silent, mournful plea. A single, devastating tear rolled down her cheek, mingling with a bitter taste of despair. The serpent might have claimed her, but she was now caught in a trap set by another, a trap designed to break her, and in doing so, to break the man who had dared to call her his. And Dante had no idea what horrifying spectacle was about to unfold or the utter betrayal that would accompany it. The phone vibrated in Dante Volkov's hand, a digital serpent coiling in his palm. It was an unknown number, an anonymous burner. He was in his penthouse office, the city lights sprawling beneath him like a scattered galaxy, the heavy scent of aged leather and ambition clinging to the air. The report on Sterling's complete financial collapse lay open on his desk, a testament to his ruthlessness. A job well done, he thought. A pest eradicated. He answered, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Volkov. A distorted voice, thick with triumph, crackled through the speaker. Volkov. Fancy a show. Your little muse has a starring role. Before Dante could respond, a video call connected. The screen flickered to life, showing the dim, cavernous interior of what looked like an abandoned warehouse. Dust motes danced in the anemic light from a single bare bulb. His gaze narrowed, scanning every detail, every shadow. Then he saw her. Alara. She was tied helpless to a support beam, her face pale, streaked with dirt and tears. Her eyes, usually so vibrant, were wide with a raw, devastating terror that tore at something deep within his chest. A primal growl, low and guttural, escaped his lips. The camera zoomed out, revealing Sterling, his face a mask of deranged glee, holding a rusty axe. No, Dante breathed, the word a silent, strangled agony. Then Sterling's voice, amplified and twisted, filled the speaker. Choose, Volkov. Your little artist's pretty face, or her precious masterpiece. Live for your viewing pleasure. The camera panned, revealing the simplest portrait, propped on a makeshift easel, shimmering mockingly in the weak light. She destroys it, or I do. And trust me, I'm far less gentle. Dante watched, frozen in a hellish tableau, as Sterling pushed the axe into Alara's bound hands. He saw the wrenching agony on her face, the defiant tremble in her body, then the slow, inevitable surrender. Her hands, the hands that painted beauty into existence, wrapped around a cold, rough handle of an instrument of destruction. His world, which he had so meticulously controlled, shattered. A cold, absolute fury descended upon Dante. It was not the calculated anger of a businessman, or the strategic rage of a crime lord. It was something far older, far more dangerous. The fury of a predator whose chosen mate had been taken, whose territory had been violated. Every cell in his body screamed with a violent, possessive need to reclaim what was his, to obliterate the insect who dared to touch her. The phone dropped from his numb fingers, clattering against the polished desk. He didn't notice. His mind was already a whirlwind of strategic calculations, a maelstrom of lethal intent. He hit a button on his intercom, his voice a low, dangerous growl that made his most hardened enforcers flinch. Locate Sterling. No. Every resource. Every contact. Tear this city apart if you have to. Find him. Find her. Within seconds, his penthouse hummed with controlled chaos. Screens flickered to life, maps glowing, surveillance feeds streaming. Logan, his right-hand man, burst into the office, his face grim. Boss? What happened? Dante didn't look at him. His eyes, now burning with a glacial fire, were fixed on the city sprawling beneath, seeing not buildings, but a network of shadows and possibilities. Sterling has Alara. He sent a video. He's making her destroy her art, or worse. His voice was low, each word laced with a lethal venom. Find her. Find him. And when you do, I want Sterling alive. But barely. The implications were clear. Logan, a man accustomed to the brutal realities of their world, nodded, his jaw tight. On it. Dante grabbed his jacket, the rich fabric feeling like a second skin. He moved with a speed and precision that belied his usual measured pace. Prepare the armored vehicle. I'm going myself. Logan hesitated. Boss, that's too dangerous. Let the teams go first. We'll pinpoint the location. Dante stopped, turning slowly. His eyes, usually pools of obsidian, now blazed with a terrifying, unholy light. He touched her, Logan. He humiliated her. He dared to use her against me. This isn't a mission. It's a declaration. And I will lead the retaliation. His voice was cold, absolute. The serpent claims what is his. And right now, what is mine has been taken. The drive was a blur of speed and controlled aggression. The armored SUV tore through the city streets, ignoring traffic laws, a black missile fueled by Dante's raging fury. He sat in the back seat, not speaking, his mind a relentless torrent of calculations. Every possible hideout Sterling could use, every old warehouse, every abandoned property linked to his past dealings. He barked orders into a comms earpiece, his instructions crisp, precise, leaving no room for error. The image of Alara's terrified face, the axe in her hand, played on an endless agonizing loop in his mind. He tasted blood, metallic and sharp, a phantom wound matching the laceration on his soul. "We have a hit, boss." Logan's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Old chemical plant, South Side. Sterling's family used to own it." Minimal security detected. Dante's eyes narrowed. "Move. Perimeter lockdown. No one in, no one out. And I want Sterling secured, not killed." He needs to witness what happens next. As they approached the dilapidated structure, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of distant streetlights, the air crackled with a palpable tension. Rain, cold and relentless, had begun to fall, mirroring the storm brewing within Dante. Tactical teams, shadowy figures in black, fanned out, their movements silent, efficient. Dante, however, moved ahead, a dark avenging angel, his pace unwavering. He didn't carry a heavy assault rifle like his men. A single, perfectly weighted handgun was holstered beneath his jacket, but he knew, with chilling certainty, that his greatest weapon was the sheer, unyielding force of his will. The breach was swift, brutal. Explosive charges ripped through a rusted loading dock door with a deafening crump, sending shrapnel and dust flying. Alara, dazed and terrified, heard the explosion, her head snapping up. She had barely brought the axe's dull blade to the canvas, her heart screaming in protest. When the world outside exploded, the warehouse was plunged into chaos. Figures in black, Dante's men, streamed in, silent and deadly, their movements fluid, precise. Gunshots echoed, sharp cracks tearing through the cavernous space. Shouts, grunts, the thud of bodies hitting the concrete floor. Alara cowered, tears streaming, her mind reeling from the sudden, terrifying violence. Then she saw him. Donna. He was a force of nature, moving through the carnage with an almost primal ferocity. He wasn't just erecting, he was fighting. His movements were economical, lethal. A precise strike to the throat, a swift, brutal kick that sent an assailant sprawling, a twist of the wrist that disarmed another with sickening ease. His eyes, when they caught the flickering light, burned with a furious, unholy glow. He was a man possessed, a serpent unleashed, utterly consumed by his rage. He cut through the remaining resistance like a hot knife through butter, his path unerringly towards the center of the warehouse, towards her. Alara watched him, a strange mix of terror and profound admiration surging through her. He was indeed a monster, a creature of violence, but he was her monster. He was coming for her. Sterling, hidden deeper in the shadows, tried to make a break for it, scrambling towards a back exit. But Logan, anticipating the move, cut him off, a menacing silhouette blocking his escape. Sterling, pale and trembling, found himself trapped. Dante reached Alara, his eyes still burning with furious intent, fixing on her bound form, then on the axe still clutched in her trembling hands, hovering inches from the canvas. The portrait, a fragile testament to her talent, remained miraculously intact. The sight of her, so utterly vulnerable, so on the brink of forced artistic suicide, sent a fresh wave of blinding rage through him. He reached for her, his movements surprisingly gentle despite the fury radiating from him. His fingers, strong and warm, carefully peeled the axe from her numb grip, tossing it aside with a clang that echoed dully. Then, with a quick, efficient movement, he cut through the ropes binding her wrists, his touch almost reverent. Alara's hands, free but shaking violently, flew to his chest, clinging to the expensive fabric of his shirt. Her head, still throbbing, leaned against his shoulder. The scent of him, leather, cold steel, and something uniquely Dante, filled her senses, a sudden, overwhelming wave of relief washing over her, so potent it almost brought her to her knees. "Alara," he murmured, his voice rough, thick with an emotion she'd never heard from him. His arms, strong and possessive, wrapped around her, pulling her against his hard, unyielding body. He held her close, pressing her face against his chest, as if trying to absorb her back into himself, to reclaim her. The tremor in his body was almost imperceptible, but she felt it, a testament to the sheer, unfathomable fear he had endured. But even in that moment of profound relief, the rage still simmered. Dante pulled back slightly, his eyes, dark and dangerous, sweeping over her tear-streaked face, tracing the grime, the residue of fear. Then his gaze, burning with an almost feral intensity, landed on Sterling, who was now being held firmly by Logan, his face a mask of terror. "You," Dante snarled, his voice a low, guttural growl that sent shivers through the warehouse. "You dared to defile what is mine. You dared to touch her." Sterling whimpered, struggling uselessly against Logan's grip. Dante's eyes narrowed, a cold, predatory glint entering their depths. He didn't need to say more. The message was clear. The serpent had reclaimed his territory, and the price for its violation would be catastrophic. Alara, still trembling in his arms, felt a profound sense of terror, but also a dangerous, exhilarating surge of possessive love. She was his, and he would burn the world down to prove it. The ordeal was over, but the true reckoning, the unleashing of Dante's full unbridled wrath, was only just beginning. The world outside the warehouse door was a blurring nightmare of flashing lights, terse commands, and the chilling metallic scent of rain-soaked fear. Alara was barely aware of being guided, almost carried, through the chaos. Her body still trembled violently, a relentless tremor that started in her bones and rippled through every nerve ending. The raw terror of Sterling's mad gleam, the cold weight of the axe in her hands, the agonizing certainty of her impending destruction, it clung to her like a shroud, refusing to dissipate. Then Dante's car. Black, sleek, an impenetrable fortress. He settled her into the plush leather seat, his movements quick, efficient, yet imbued with an almost frantic gentleness. His jacket, still damp from the rain, felt like a shield around her as he wrapped it tightly over her shoulders. The scent of him, that intoxicating mix of expensive cologne, cold steel, and something uniquely primal, filled her lungs, cutting through the lingering stench of chloroform and desperation. It was the scent of safety, of reclaiming. He sat beside her, his hand warm and firm, closing over hers. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The raw fury still radiating from him was a tangible thing, a dark, pulsing energy that both terrified and profoundly soothed her. His thumb stroked the back of her hand, a silent anchor in a world that had just spun violently off its axis. I couldn't. Alara choked out, her voice a raw, broken whisper. The image of the portrait, pristine yet threatened, flashed before her eyes. Dante squeezed her hand, his gaze still fixed on her face, searching, assessing. "You didn't," he stated, his voice a low, rough murmur. "That's all that matters." The absolute certainty in his tone, the complete absolution of her perceived failure, brought a fresh wave of tears to her eyes. He hadn't seen the axe touch the canvas, only her hands reaching for it. He hadn't witnessed her terrorized submission, only her unharmed being. He saw only her innocence, her survival. And in his eyes, that was enough. The car moved with silent speed, leaving the wreckage of the warehouse behind. She vaguely registered Logan's voice on the radio, crisp and efficient, confirming Sterling's capture, detailing the intricate web of his connections to the underworld figures who had enabled his return. Dante listened, his jaw tight, his eyes never leaving Alara's face. When they arrived at his penthouse, it felt like entering another world. A world of hushed opulence, soft lighting, and an almost sacred quiet. Dante led her directly to a guest suite, a serene space dominated by a king-size bed adorned with crisp, white linens and large windows overlooking the glittering city. The air was warm, faintly scented with lavender, utterly devoid of the damp chill and chemical stench of her recent prison. He didn't leave her. He helped her shed the damp jacket, his hands brushing her arms, sending shivers through her skin. He knelt, untying the rough ropes from her ankles, then gently massaged her reddened skin. His touch was exquisite, a tender ministrant to her wounded body. "You need a hot bath," he murmured, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "And clean clothes. I'll be outside." He pulled a bell cord, and a moment later, a quiet, efficient woman appeared, her face kind but stoic. "See to her," Dante commanded, his gaze conveying an unspoken urgency. "Anything she needs." Alara watched him leave, the door closing with a soft click. The sheer weight of his presence, his silent, powerful care, enveloped her. In the steaming bath filled with aromatic salts, she allowed herself to weep, silent, cleansing tears that washed away not just the grime of the warehouse, but the lingering residue of fear and despair. The warmth of the water was a balm, soothing her aching muscles, slowly coaxing the tension from her body. When she emerged, wrapped in a plush, oversized robe, fresh clothes laid out on the bed, she felt a fragile sense of calm returning. But the events of the last few hours had irrevocably altered her. She had seen Dante's monster, unleashed and terrifying, and she had felt, with a profound, almost primal certainty, that his monstrousness was for her. A fierce, protective rage that would scorch the earth to ensure her safety. Dante was waiting in the main living area, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He gestured to a large, comfortable sofa. Food is coming. Something light. He observed her, his eyes still intense, but now tinged with a deep, consuming relief. You're safe now, Alara. She sat, curling into the soft cushions, the warmth of the tea the house staff had brought seeping into her chilled fingers. Sterling, she began, her voice still a little hoarse. What will happen to him? Dante's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. He took a slow sip of his drink. He will become a lesson. A very public, very painful lesson. He rose and walked to a large, seamless monitor embedded in the wall. With a tap of his finger, it flickered to life, displaying a series of rapidly scrolling news feeds, financial reports, and art world gossip columns. He thought he could use you to shame me, Dante said, his voice cold, devoid of mercy. To show weakness in my protection. He miscalculated. The screen shifted, showing a live feed from what used to be Sterling's gallery, now surrounded by flashing police lights. Reporters clamored, their voices a muffled buzz. Tonight, the world will learn about Arthur Sterling's true business, Dante continued, his eyes fixed on the screen, a predatory glint in their depths. His illegal acquisitions, his money laundering schemes, his systematic exploitation of struggling artists, his connections to unsavory individuals. The monitor then displayed a series of damning documents, bank transfers, hidden contracts, a veritable avalanche of irrefutable evidence. Every sin he ever committed, meticulously cataloged, now made public. His name, once associated with exclusivity, will become synonymous with fraud. His assets seized, his reputation utterly decimated. Alara watched, a growing sense of morbid fascination replacing her fear. This was Dante's justice. Swift, total, and utterly without appeal. It was not the justice of the law, but the terrifying, absolute justice of the serpent. He wasn't merely destroying Sterling. He was erasing him from existence, turning him into a pariah, a living ghost haunted by his own corruption. He will lose everything, Alara whispered, the words tasting like ash. Everything, Dante confirmed, turning to face her, his eyes cold and unwavering. And then some. He will be hunted by those he betrayed, scorned by those he once sought to impress. He will live a life of utter destitution and public humiliation. It is the fate of those who touch what is mine. A shiver ran down Alara's spine, not of fear for herself, but of profound awe for the man before her. She understood then, with crystal clarity, that this was the brutal, unyielding side of his protection. He didn't just shield her. He annihilated anything that dared to threaten her. It was dark, undeniably so, a raw display of power that belonged to the shadows. Yet, looking at his hard, beautiful face, knowing that this monstrousness was wielded for her, a strange, fierce acceptance bloomed in her heart. She had been saved, not by a knight in shining armor, but by a serpent whose venom, when turned outward, ensured her absolute, unshakable safety. And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet luxury of his domain, wrapped in the comforting scent of him, Alara felt a deep, profound sense of gratitude and something far more dangerous. She had seen his darkness, and instead of recoiling, a part of her had embraced it, because his darkness was her shield. And the weight of that truth, heavy and absolute, settled deep within her soul. Her trauma was healing, but her understanding of Dante and her place in his world had just been irrevocably, profoundly redefined. She was not just safe, she was claimed. And that claim, in its terrifying totality, was now the very essence of her being. Have you ever felt your soul trapped, your talent uncredited, your future suffocated by a past you didn't choose? Alara's story whispers to the part of us that yearns for recognition, for absolute safety, for a love so potent it reshapes worlds. It reminds us your worth isn't defined by debts or battles, but by the fierce spirit that endures. Dante, the formidable Mafia boss, didn't just see distress. He recognized a masterpiece, claiming it with a love so powerful it shattered her chains, building a golden empire around her. This tale is a testament to second chances, to profound healing found in unexpected, dangerous devotion. If this journey resonated, if you believe in love fierce enough to redeem dark souls, join our community. Like this video, subscribe for more stories that heal and inspire, and comment below, "My worth is eternal."